basically get to the same level as their mimetic model, they start to become mimetic rivals and they start to have this mimetic conflict over the same desire. And if you scale this up to all of society, you get this like war of all against all, which ends in the sacrifice of the scapegoat.
Hello there, and welcome to Mostly Harmless. My name is Alan Steele. I'm your host today, and my guest is Wuchang Fan. He, sometimes known as Q, he is a writer and a consultant and one of the most interesting thinkers that I've encountered on the internet. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. So welcome, Q, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So I encountered you probably 2 years ago or thereabouts on Twitter, and you were one of the first people that convinced me that there was more going on Twitter, that there was some actual interesting thoughts being discussed. You have a very non-standard and nuanced way of approaching topics that often just go down these kind of grooves of tired cliches. So there's a whole bunch of things that I want to explore today. But maybe the best place to start is this article that you wrote for the American Mind. There are two parts, and you said there's going to be a third part coming out soon. Is that correct?
So there's gonna be another part that's coming out that's not gonna be part of that series.
Okay.
That should be coming out pretty soon, and then there should be another part that's coming out that's with that series, probably sometime after that.
Okay. Okay. So the article is called Biosecurity's Faustian Bargains. Can you maybe start by just explaining what that means? What's the Faustian bargain here?
So I guess at first I didn't pick that title, and they wanted me to change titles around, and I just decided to go with this. But basically, there's a lot of hidden problems with the coronavirus epidemic, right? Like a lot of people, I guess most people, when they heard about the virus, I don't know when they heard about it, it's probably like closer to late February. And most people probably didn't take it too seriously until whenever in March they started to have the lockdown. But like the conversation before the lockdown and before it was like widely aware by the general public was very different. And like the original uh, conversation around it online was what was the origin of the virus. And most people didn't really take it too seriously. All the academics and officials like the WHO, they always kept on trying to deny that it came from a lab. And they always basically said, no, it's completely natural. But when you talk about things that way, you're basically completely ignoring all the crazy types of experiments we've been doing in biology over the past couple years, probably more like decades.
Right. So and you have some experience or you have some background in this in the sense that your dad worked in epidemiology. Is that correct? So
Mhm.
you've been exposed to biolabs and all that sort of stuff. So uh, I'm what I've encountered with this whole coronavirus situation is there's a lot of just bad thinking going around, um, a lot of assumptions. One of the things which you point out in your article is it's possible to have a scenario where this comes out of a lab, but that this is not any kind of conspiracy or this is not engineered. Can you maybe
Yeah,
expound on that?
yeah, exactly. So basically, let's see, how do I start talking about it? Yeah. So basically, all these labs that create vaccines, right? These virology labs, they can be dual purpose, dual use. So dual use is, I guess, the technical term for saying it could be used for civilian use or military use, which means you basically have all the same equipment set up to research vaccines or just do basic research compared to creating a bioweapon. Like you basically use the exact same uh, equipment that's available there, so you can't really be sure what are they actually doing. So that's
Hmm.
one issue. So like it's very possible that they weren't trying to create a bioweapon, but that doesn't mean that the facility couldn't easily be switched over to creating bioweapons at some point. So just by having so many of these types of facilities around, that's a hidden risk that most people don't consider.
So one thing which has been on my mind a lot is in America at least there is this kind of, I don't know, maybe worship is too strong a word, but there's a kind of veneration of science and scientists
Hmm.
in a very loose way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think that, well, there's something special about these people and what's going on here.
Hmm.
But really, these are just people, right? I mean, and all the kind of, yes, you want there to be safe standard practices and all this kind of stuff, but you relate a story about how you once ate a, what was it?
A rabbit from my dad's lab when I was like
Right.
young. Yeah.
Right. So you're eating a lab animal, and the idea is that this is not necessarily a unique event in terms of
Hmm.
uh, standard lab standards. That who knows what could be going on, um,
Hmm.
and especially when you're talking about China or other countries. So how let me approach it from this way, because I've been following your thoughts on the coronavirus for a while, because you've actually been talking about this since I think early January, maybe. I mean, you were way ahead of the curve on this stuff. And why do you think that there's a hidden danger here, or is that true? Do you think that there's dangers that we're not aware of?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the types of research that that basically is being done is called the gain of function research, which basically means you're adding new functions to certain viruses to figure out how do they work. Like at least the claimed purpose of this type of research is like you're trying to figure out how to prevent these types of really crazy diseases that spread really quickly. But the problem is like you're creating a virus that previously did not infect humans as effectively inside the lab. So you're
Right.
basically creating a bioweapon first and then trying to use it to create the something that might be used to prevent a epidemic from happening.
So it might not be something that is technically a bioweapon or it's technically engineered, but practically speaking, that's kind of what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, and also like engineered, it could mean so many different
Right.
ways of doing things, right? Like you could be trapping a whole bunch of animals in the same cage and just like letting it spread naturally, but it's not really natural. Like you don't necessarily need to manipulate the DNA directly to make the evolutionary process of the virus just go so much faster than it typically would in nature.
Right. That was one thing that stood out to me in your article is you were saying, well, you could be infecting lab animals with multiple viruses and trying to maybe speed up the mutation
Hmm.
for research purposes, but this could have this secondary effect that if this ever got out, or we don't really know what might happen there.
Right, right. Like the intention of the researchers, it's probably not malicious. Maybe it is, but it probably isn't. But that doesn't mean that they aren't creating something that's incredibly dangerous using like very dangerous methods.
Hmm. So to move on to a slightly different part of the whole coronavirus situation, you point out that the the conversation about quarantine and social distancing
Mhm.
is, I don't know, I don't remember what words you use, but it's kind of stupid. It's kind of
Yeah.
low level. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is going to be the article that should be coming out hopefully within the next couple of days that I'm writing with my current roommates here, which is basically there's like a human instinct that's being hijacked, right, by the lockdown. And because like if you remember the early days during like early February, it was the left, like Vox and stuff, they're trying to like make fun of all these like right wing conspiracy theorists or like Silicon Valley venture capitalists for wearing masks and not wanting to touch people. They were saying this is a right wing conspiracy to keep the immigrants out of the country.
Hmm.
But then suddenly there was like a shift of the narrative after the lockdown where the right is now adopting the old leftist talking points and saying the virus is fake and you shouldn't wear masks and stuff like that.
Right. So, I just want to sort of, I don't know, maybe I don't need to put this disclaimer in here, but you're not necessarily defending a political point of view. I mean, I've heard you, as far as I don't really know what your politics are, but that's always a kind of tricky issue
Yeah.
with at least this coronavirus situation is that, like I said earlier, you know, it kind of gets into these grooves where it becomes
Mhm.
this very simplified kind of political thing. But what you're saying is just look at the evolution of this discourse and what people you know have such short term memory about this that they forget what they were arguing about before.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I'm not really interested in pigeonholing myself into any part party line specifically.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I want to get into something. I think when I first encountered you on Twitter, you were talking about Nassim Taleb and some of his ideas, these sort of memes or concepts, heuristics,
Hmm.
and one of them which I found very useful is this idea of anti-fragility. And you sort
Hmm.
of you didn't mention it in the article, but you kind of get there by talking about our tunnel vision about urbanization and I just maybe you can get into that a little bit and explain maybe explain first what anti-fragility is, what these things, robust, fragile, anti-fragile, what these terms
Hmm.
mean.
Yeah. Hold up. Let me try to think about this. Mm. Wait, I think there's like another point related to this I want to come back to. Let me just think about it.
Okay.
What were we talking about right before this?
Uh, that's a good question. um, we're talking about well the discourse, how the discourse has shifted
Mhm.
over the time span of this virus situation and the quarantine and
Right, right. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so basically, yeah, so the point I want to bring up is like there's like this type of human sacrifice element going on here. It's like people are saying, yes, we should sacrifice all these old people to to some sort of like demon so that the virus will go away. That's like exactly how the ancient religions were created, right? So that's the whole mimetic theory framework. Like in mimetic theory, it's the idea is basically ancient mythologies and religions came from basically there's a crisis and people don't know what to do, so they all kind of fight each other and they don't know what's going on, and then eventually they settle on sacrificing a scapegoat, and then the crisis gets resolved.
right.
So
So it just starts out as kind of an association and then develops into this belief system.
yeah, so basically right now we're kind of at a point where all these like tribal people are banding up together and saying we should sacrifice the old people so that the economy can keep going. So I find that like very satanic. And like it's crazy how these people who are like so-called religious on the right wing, they don't get it. Like they're saying that they want to sacrifice the old people to save the economy. It's absolutely nuts.
Mhm.
Like so before this we were talking about there's all these false dichotomies and weird frameworks around the whole situation, right? So this is probably the prime example. Like you don't have to sacrifice the economy or the old people. Like you don't have to choose. That's not how this thing works.
Right, right. And yeah, this is the one thing that I've
Mhm.
I wasn't so interested in it at first. It was just kind of a meme, coronavirus. Okay, what's going on? And
Mhm.
then obviously it's kind of invaded all of
Mhm.
our world in a way that you can't avoid. And I just started to notice how all the conversations about this were just missing. They were missing a, a, a target. They were missing the target. They were missing the point about what are we actually supposed to do about this? So
Mhm.
that's definitely something that I've noticed. You brought up, I think, the idea of the shutdown and masks and you know what the effectiveness of these strategies are, and
Mhm.
maybe why we're at the place that we are because we didn't pay enough attention earlier on. We were kind of
Yeah.
had blinders on.
Yeah, like it's very strange that most Americans and Europeans, they're just completely ignoring what some countries are doing. Like for example, Vietnam, Japan, Taiwan, Mongolia. They've all like responded extremely quickly, and they've basically. I mean, I guess I don't want to say the problem is completely gone in those countries because like the virus can always like have another wave or whatever, but they've definitely solved it so far in a way that's far better than the United States and European countries.
Hmm. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is there doesn't seem to be, I can't see strong correlations with the effectiveness of these different policies at a superficial level. And
Hmm.
so I started to think, well, maybe there's more factors involved here. This is a complex system. When you're talking about a country and also and just biology, these are very complex systems that maybe we're taking too a simple a view about how we're supposed to approach these things. So one of the things that immediately comes to mind when you're talking about Taiwan or these other countries is these are not the same cultures. They have completely different approaches to dealing with these kinds of problems. I mean, when I look in generally speaking, in East Asian countries, you have much more of a propensity to wear masks, even for just regular flu seasons. How big of a factor do you think just that cultural element is?
Yeah, I think that's a huge factor. Like for like especially for Japan, they basically had like the most loose lockdown imaginable. It's even looser than the lockdown in the US, where they don't even punish people if they break the lockdown. They just say, "Yeah, we recommend this, but you don't really have to do it." They don't punish anyone who break the lockdown at all. But because they have this culture of wearing masks, they have like 100 times less the death of United States, 100 times less the number of cases, and you can't say that they're sacrificing the elderly for the economy because that's not true. Japan's probably the culture that cares more about the elderly than anyone else,
Hmm.
and have like a higher proportion of the elderly than the US, like way higher. For example, I think Japan has like 36 million people who are over the age of 65, while the US has like 50 million, which is so the Japanese number of elderly people is like net number is barely lower than US. Yeah, like their total population is less than half of the
Right. So
US.
per capita, it's way bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, like they really care about the elderly people. Yet
Right.
they didn't have this crazy lockdown. Yet they because they have like this culture where they care about the elderly and this culture where they wear masks, they didn't have this huge problem.
Hmm. That's interesting. So I'm wondering what. Um, let me come back to this idea of fragility then, because this seems to be inextricably linked to the culture idea. And
Yeah.
it's sort of what are we prepared to sacrifice? So you're mentioning that
Mhm.
there's this kind of idea of we'll sacrifice the elderly for the economy because maybe that's a net better result. Um, but there's other ideas of sacrifice that maybe we could play into this. Let me come to a slightly different point then, which is this idea of mimetic theory. So, can you maybe explain a little bit about this? What I tried reading Girard's book, Rene
Mhm.
Girard's book, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World, and I didn't honestly understand it that much. So maybe you can just go into this and the mimetic theory and how that plays into violence and sacrifice.
Yeah, so I would say Things Hidden is probably not Gerard's best book to start on if you want to understand how the theory works. There's a couple other ones that's probably better, and also there's like YouTube videos where Gerard talks about things where he's been interviewed. That's usually a good start point, as well as a couple podcasts he was on back when he was alive.
Hmm.
And the book I would probably start with for Gerard would be I See Satan Fall Like Lightning.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so that's one of his later books, right from a couple years before he died, where he kind of like explains the whole framework more clearly. But that book also gets pretty repetitive.
So,
So yeah, so essentially he kind of like says the difference. So he has this whole framework where he starts out by was the observation that humans mimic, like a lot of behaviors are mimetic, and then he kind of goes into a framework where he distinguishes Christianity from other religions due to how it handles sacrifice. So it's kind of like a two-part theory. Yeah. So the first part is he basically got to that point by reading all these classic novels and kind of just observing people's romantic relationships in real life. And he kind of saw, yeah, why does those two close friends they like the same girl because they're similar to each other, and then they fight over the same girl, and then as soon as like one of them stops liking the girl, the other stops liking her too, and so it's like
well, this is like the common expression. You're the sum of your five closest friends, or something like that. So,
mm-hmm.
but I mean, there's a dynamic process there, right? Because you also you become friends with the people that are close to you. So it's sort of if it's close enough, and then you start to influence each other, and you have this imitative thing relationship going on.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so basically what Gerard noticed is like Shakespeare and Dostoevsky and Proust, their stories were filled with these types of relationships, and then he decided to find the logic in these relationships, and he found that's how he came up with this idea of like people copy desires from their mimetic models, but like if they basically get to the same level as their mimetic model, they start to become mimetic rivals, and they start to have this mimetic conflict over the same desire. And if you scale this up to all of society, you get this like war of all against all, which ends in the sacrifice of scapegoat. And that's kind of his theory of the origin of religions.
I see. So the idea is that because you have this, it's such a total kind of conflict that you have to find some way to divert that violence or that energy. So you have a scapegoat that you sacrifice, and that's okay. Well, we can agree to disagree. We can continue to coexist to some degree. Is that correct?
Kinda, but I think it's not even quite that. It's more like an illusion where they literally believe this scapegoat is wrong for everything. Like you see all those people who are like just screaming at Trump every single day. They're just like posting nonstop about Trump on Facebook, Twitter, wherever. It's like Trump is the devil. Trump did this. Everything that's wrong with my life is because of Trump.
Right.
It's like that type of stuff. It's like okay, maybe objectively Trump did do make some mistakes and he did do some things that aren't good, but like the reality is not he didn't cause literally every single problem in your life. So
Right.
that's
Right.
why he's the scapegoat.
I see. I mean, one of the things I've noticed in this is not new to politics in by any means, but especially with this coronavirus situation, is how much people have started to kind of assume other things that you believe based on just making very basic points that maybe no one else is making. So that to my eyes, it sort of looks like, well, if you're not providing the appropriate signals that you're in this tribe or in that tribe, then you must automatically be the enemy. You know, if you're not signaling to us the proper way.
Yeah.
Um, so returning to this idea of because in the first part of your article, you're talking about uh, just general concepts of biosecurity and what could be happening in labs and all this sort of stuff. In the second part, you go in a slightly different direction, and I wanted to get into that. So returning to this idea of fragility and maybe what if anything is there some problem in this mimetic framework? Is there some concept that we're too tied to about urbanization or consumerism or something like that, that's causing us to come to bad decisions now? I don't know. Does that make sense?
It's a pretty vague question, but I kind of get what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So basically, we fell into this trap where we're just like, we have this tunnel vision over this one solution, right? Because China did this thing first, so therefore everyone must do it. China did this lockdown first, therefore everyone else must also have this crazy lockdown. That's kind of like what we fell into. And I guess part of it is mimetic. Like these countries, the world leaders are looking around. It's like, oh, this is a new situation. We're all freaking out. We don't know what to do. Let's see what solutions have others done. And they just said, okay, well, they started in China, and they were the first to kind of do something that's pretty effective, which was this extreme lockdown where they forced everyone to stay home. So we're all just gonna copy this solution. We're all just gonna mimic it.
Right. You even had like the UK, which started out with a different strategy of trying to get to herd immunity and not locking
Which
down,
is
and then
also a dumb solution.
mm.
But like the opposite of like a dumb solution is probably just another dumb solution, right?
Right. This is the problem with the. Actually, what I wanted to mention was in your bio on the American Mind, you had an interesting quote here, which I wanted to tie into all this. I know I'm kind of skipping around because
Yeah,
there's so many different ideas here
right.
that I'm trying to tie together. But you said that you're an opponent of the mimetic contagion of first order thinkers,
Mhm.
and that phrase stuck out to me. It seems like there's a problem with the sort of the intellectual class, what Nassim Taleb would call the IYIs, the
Yeah,
intellectual
yeah.
yet idiots, that there's this sort of very narrow approach to all these problems that sort of like the false dichotomies that you're talking about, that,
Mhm.
yeah, the opposite of a dumb solution. Maybe it's not the best solution. Maybe it's just another dumb solution. Can
Mhm.
you maybe just talk a little bit about that? What's the problem with first order thinkers?
Um, yeah, so I guess when it relates to the virus, it's kind of like this dichotomy of choosing between the saving lives versus saving the economy. I guess that's the main focus of my
Uh-huh.
conversation here. It's
Right.
like that's you only have that dichotomy if you're first order thinker, because that's not how it works. Because if everyone dies, then you also have no economy, right?
Right. Right.
So, and like basically from the very start, I knew that was going to be an economic crisis. Like that could potentially be worse than, I guess, just the effect of the virus itself. If you only consider the, I guess, the health risks.
Right. So there's second order effects to it.
Right.
Even without the lockdown, there's second order
Yeah.
economic
Yeah.
effects.
Well, even if we did no lockdown whatsoever, we tried to go the herd immunity route, then things would go pretty much. Well, plenty of people have written essays on why we should flatten the curve. So most of those people have the right reasoning for that. But the question is now I guess there's another order on top of that, which is what is the best way to flatten the curve? And most people kind of mimetically fell into the camp where the best way to flatten the curve is to lock down everything, and they don't really know when to end the lockdown.
Hmm. Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, the mimetic effects of this are really apparent. I mean, that's the this is one thing that I've kind of been concerned about for a while is, there's huge advantages to being globally connected now and all the advantages of the internet. But one of the things that comes along with that is that you have these memes which take over people's minds and uh, convince everyone that this is maybe more persuasive than it is, that people stop relying on their own common sense and common judgment. And that seems to be really, really in full flow during this coronavirus situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, to completely change tack, I wanted to bring up something. You are kind of a hero to all the basement dwelling geeks everywhere because you got a job. You got a job offer from just shit posting on Twitter. Can you just describe what happened there?
So I guess that's about capturing windows of opportunity, right? And really, I think I'm not even close to being the first one who's done it. I think Tim Ferriss kind of did something very similar, which is basically before I got this job opportunity, like for a long time, I've been following his stuff, his works, and basically, you just gotta position yourself in a way where you're exposed to luck, and you can just kind of like capture the lucky outcomes when you're ready. Like when
Right. This is an idea I've heard this sort of approach from Tim Ferriss, and also a book which I highly recommend to people is Scott Adams' How to Fail at Almost
oh
Everything.
yeah, that was very good too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this idea of, well, look, you just need to put yourself out there and sort of run the program, and after enough iterations, you'll hit something. You can't just
Yeah.
follow your passions or put all your eggs into one basket. That kind of approach. But
Right.
so you were writing about, I don't know, all sorts of things on Twitter, and you got an offer to consult. Um, what do you mind me asking? Like, what are you engaged in now? What besides writing these articles for the American Mind? What occupies your time?
So I guess I've temporarily moved away from my business partner in that I guess in that what do we call it, in that project.
Hmm.
So at least physically moved away because he has to take care of like his like family ish stuff like during the coronavirus
Sure.
crisis. But we're still working together remotely. Like one of the projects we're working on is well working we're not the founders of Rome. We're just like users of like this new note-taking app called Rome Research, and we're probably gonna build something on top of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been hearing about Rome peripherally for a while. It seems like there's the design of that is really interesting. But what I wanted to get to is why why would shitposting be thought of as like, okay, here's someone that I want to hire because they're shitposting on Twitter. And I know you've written about sort of similar things to this before in terms of, I know shitposting and trolling are kind of two different things, but trolling and how there's a kind of aspect similar to Zen koans, and there's hidden information here.
Mhm.
Can you maybe just speak to that?
Oh man, I had some good words for this that I wrote before, but I can't recall the exact words I used. But yeah, basically, you're trying to change people's perceptions, right, through like a unexpected way. And when you kind of go through the process and realize you shouldn't be upset at something, you actually learn a very important lesson. And that's what all these Zen masters are doing.
Right. So the idea is you sort of, with the Zen masters at least, is you ask a question that doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
And so, well, the initiate thinks like, what's going on here? And then you realize, you sort of go into meta analysis and you realize that there actually is an important lesson there.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say like whenever you're trolling or shit posting online, you get into so many situations like that.
Right. Yeah, yeah. That there may be something deeper going on that that is pointing to.
Hmm.
Interesting. Um, so I guess we didn't actually cover it. Can we just return to the idea of fragility and anti-fragility and what these means and maybe why they might be useful concepts? Um, so what is anti-fragility?
Yeah, so the way Taleb defines is that you have something fragile which basically breaks. Like for example, you have a piece of glass, you drop on the floor and it breaks. And then you have something that's robust. You drop like a rock that hits the floor, it doesn't break, so nothing happens, it stays the same. And then you have something anti-fragile, which is like a system that basically benefits from small harm. So, for example, in a biological system, when you exercise, you're breaking down your muscles, but then you grow even more afterwards.
Right. So a small stress kind of
Hmm.
reconfigures the system to be more resistant to stress overall.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I found it a super useful mental model. I'm I'm wondering how I'm trying to tie a bunch of different ideas together here. I know we're kind of jumping all over the place, but
Hmm.
I'm how do you think this relates to culture and what this idea of tunnel vision of urbanization? You've spoken some amount. I haven't read too much about homesteading and maybe localism and these different approaches to society to living that are maybe more anti-fragile than our current approach.
Yeah, so this is something I'm still working on trying to understand completely because there are like other factors involved. For
Hmm.
example, like if you look at the complex systems and how they work and scaling laws, you basically see that urbanization is kind of inevitable. And in a sense, cities are kind of anti-fragile. It's very hard for you to get rid of city. Like what you notice is like there are cities that have existed for thousands of years, but companies on average wouldn't even survive past like 10 years.
Hmm.
So there's something to cities that's like far more um, anti-fragile than other systems. But at the same time, they also increase other risks. For example, in a city, there's certain things that scale super linearly. So super linear means it's above linear. So it could be exponential, it could be quadratic, anything like that. And part of why cities grow so big is because it's easier to network, it's easier to get a higher paying job. Like all these things scale super linearly with the size of a city. So that's why people come to them. But as we see right now, especially in New York, risks of pandemics also scale super linearly in cities. Like that's why New York is affected way worse than all these other places.
Right. I saw some map. I don't know if this was reliable necessarily, but it was showing that basically you have a few urban centers that are making up like 30% of all the coronavirus cases in America. And then, the rest of the country accounts for everything else. So it's this disproportionate representation.
Hmm.
Um, this is one of the things that I noticed when the coronavirus situation started to unfold. One reason that I was initially worried is because I was reading people like you and people on Complexity Science Twitter who were basically pointing out that people don't have a good intuition for exponential growth. They don't have a good intuition for these kinds of systems.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely there's something disproportionate going on there. Um, we're maybe going to wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so, but I want to kind of go into something more pragmatic, because you've spoken, I mean, you've got a lot of interesting thoughts on this coronavirus pandemic, and especially from a perspective of, what you should do and prepping and all this kind of stuff. So maybe can you just, what would you recommend people do to deal with this situation as individuals?
As individuals,
Yeah.
um, I'd say just most importantly, just I guess wear a mask if you go to crowded areas. Like for example, if you go grocery shopping, but you don't need to wear a mask if you're just like walking around outside in the sun. So, and then when you wash your hands when you come back from like doing a whole bunch of things, touching a whole bunch of things outside. But once you're inside your house, you don't really need to keep on washing your hands over and over again.
Right. It just becomes this sort of ritual that you feel, oh, okay, this is helping, but there's also there's kind of a Goldilocks zone for a lot of these behaviors that if it goes too far in one direction, then you're actually causing more harm. So
Yeah, because like if you're wearing a mask like inside your own house, well, I just don't know what's going on in your mind. Or like you're washing your hands constantly when you've never even been outside. It's like what are you trying to do other than destroy the natural microbiome on your skin?
hmm. Well, regarding wearing a mask inside, one of the things you pointed out, I think you were relating it to the SARS epidemic, is that if you have a maybe more poorly built building where the ventilation is connected or the plumbing is connected between units, that's one method of transmission that maybe people aren't looking at.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know how people's specific apartment buildings are structured, but they should probably look into like how are the airflow and plumbing systems connected or are they not connected?
Hmm. Right. Um, Another thing you've talked about is the importance of doing breathing exercises,
Hmm.
because even this is another point with the coronavirus thing that I gets annoying is it's sort of we use these figures of deaths or confirmed cases or something like this, and that's not really giving you the picture. And maybe there's a significant proportion of people that get it and survive but have decreased lung capacity. um, I, I don't know what your experience is with Buteyko or Wim Hof, but have you tried these methods, and what do you think about them?
Yeah, yeah, I have some experience. So I guess the most I've held my breath was a bit over 4 minutes.
Wow.
Uh,
I
that
can't do
that's
that.
that's without exhaling. With so if I do the Buteyko CP test, I guess a bit under a minute.
Okay. I haven't tried the CP test. I'm not sure what that is.
Mhm. Yeah, so that test is basically you breathe normally, and when you exhale, you hold it for not as long as you could, but like until you're somewhat uncomfortable, but your next breath is still like a normal breath rather than like a huge deep breath. It's kind of hard to measure.
Right. It seems like it's a little
Um,
subjective.
yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, I personally, I've had breathing problems, sinus issues for a long time, and the Buteyko method I found really interesting. That would sort of
Yeah,
clear things up.
so what I really want to point out is like these methods, it's not just about your lung capacity. That's not what it is.
Right.
It's like calibrating your whole body, like calibrating your whole respiratory system, like how efficiently you use O2 in your blood and how efficiently can you like handle CO2 in your blood. And this affects like all sorts of other systems too, including your immune system and how much you need to sleep per night and stuff like that.
Well, see, I really like this stuff because it seems to me like people want to feel like they're doing something, and they want to have some kind of ritual or some action that they can do, that so that it doesn't feel like we're just being hit by some some unstoppable force, you know. And so whether it's washing your hands or wearing masks or whatever it might be, this seems like, you know, breathing. This is the most basic, uh, fundamental thing about a respiratory disease. So if you can change your approach to that, or if you can improve that in some way, that seems like it could be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to use this as like a ritual, I would actually recommend against Wim Hof and be recommending Buteyko more because Buteyko is more of like something about correcting your habits. And he basically has like a different protocol for every hour of the day. Like what do you do when you go to sleep and what do you do when you wake up and stuff like that, which I haven't been following the whole system. It's a bit too much. But the point is like you can do this consistently without overdoing it. But with Wim Hof, if you do it too much, you can easily overdo it. When you do the extreme deep breathing, like you might feel like your throat hurts the next day or something.
Right, I see. Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap up probably. And is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we go, I guess?
Um, yeah. So there's like a couple projects I'm playing around with, which I'm thinking about launching in regards to the coronavirus. So like earlier today, I was trying to set up a website. I own a couple domains. So one of them is called Corona PTSD. Because like if you look at the studies on SARS, like something crazy, like 40% of SARS patients develop PTSD afterwards, which is higher than the amount of people who suffer during earthquakes and such situations. And we still don't know if that might happen to coronavirus patients yet. Like at least for the severe cases, it's entirely possible that will happen to them.
Yeah, this, I mean, the secondary effects of this are really
Hmm.
something I think aren't being given enough attention. I've been speaking for a while now about, you know, the dangers of being in social isolation inside, where you're not getting sun, where
Hmm.
you're probably sitting on the couch and maybe affecting your posture and not breathing properly, and then possibly making your immune system even more dangerous, and then the psychological effects as well. So that's
Yeah, so like you can't really see how I'm sitting right now, but I'm not sitting. I'm just kneeling on the ground. Like I got rid of my chair. I'm just like either sitting on meditation cushion or I'm just kneeling.
oh, okay. I feel bad now for sitting sitting on a chair.
No, it's like because I got rid of my chair because I feel like it's affecting my posture. I would rather just like kneel here. It's better that
Hmm.
way. And
So what are you hoping to do with this website then? What are you hoping to do with that project?
I registered like over 2 months ago. I still don't really know exactly what I'm gonna do with it. But I guess the first step, I'll put up like a Discord or Slack invite link and see what people make out of the community probably.
Just try to crowdsource it a bit and see what
Yeah, like I
people
don't
want.
want to really actively manage it. It's more like if there's like an organic community that gathers there, I guess that'll be kind of cool. If not, then it doesn't really matter either.
Right, right.
And then another thing I want to start is like some sort of like prepping company, which I've been in talks with some friends about. And I guess I'm not going to reveal too much information about that yet.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, I mean, that sounds fascinating. The prepping thing, you know, to come back to the idea of how the discourse has shifted and how we just kind of forgot about the timeline of this.
Hmm.
That's a funny thing because the left has been kind of criticizing crazy hick right wingers for years about prepping, and now it seems like, oh, well, maybe there was something there that we should have paid attention to.
Yeah, but like the crazy thing is like the typical right wingers, they're just kind of throwing the preppers under the bus, like they don't even exist, and just saying,
Right.
"Oh, all hoax."
Right. Yeah. So there you get that those grooves again where it's just this is my whole totalistic approach to the thing, and if you don't conform to the group, then you're out.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, listen, thanks so much for coming on and for having this conversation. I'm looking forward to. Do you have a name for the not the third part of the Faustian bargains, but do you have a name for this other article that comes out? Do you know what that's going to be called or what it's going to be about?
I don't have a finished title yet, but basically, where our working title is how the lockdown hijacked conservative instincts.
Uh huh. All right. Well, I'm going to be looking forward to that with great interest. You're, as I said at the beginning, you're one of my favorite thinkers online and on Twitter. So it's been great to talk with you here.
Hmm.
If you want to find Q on Twitter, his handle is at Mimetic Value. That's Mimetic Value. Anywhere else that you want to mention?
I guess that's it for now.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Hmm. All right, thank you.